what they are doing is very contrived, it's very willful, and people say, well, I can't believe the pilots know they're doing it. Well, let me assure you, they do. Chemtrails, sadly, is nothing new. We're just starting to notice them. That's the shock for us. They've been doing it for years. It's been pioneered in the States. It's something that Rockefellers were involved with and sponsoring. The two purposes for chemtrailing are very, very clear.
I've been flying for 34 years and I've flown over 26 different aircraft types. I have had varied experience from flight testing through to specialist cargo, racehorses and so on. And I've also been flying for military previously, and latterly it's with commercial airlines. And that's been short haul, medium haul and long haul, and anything from light jets to heavy jets. So that's my background.
Have you seen a difference in over the years? I mean, I'm pushing 50 years of age, and I remember the summers I used to have as a child, and I recall a lot of blue skies back in those days, and now it seems very different. I do remember, I always talk about normalisation, the way that the world runs at the moment, especially we are, in society, we are being normalised into certain things, and they introduce things into consciousness. And I remember the Halifax advert as a child, where there was a cross, 2 aeroplanes flew like that, and I remember this cross, and I didn't think of anything of it at all at the time, and I don't think anybody did. But then over the past few years, there's been all these talks about chemtrails and the difference between chemtrails and contrails. So there's all this argument starts brewing on the internet. Oh no, it's contrails, but you're going to tell me that there's actually something nefarious really going on?
Sadly, yes, it's a hard truth, but yes, there is. I must admit, when I've flown previously, I remember having a senior first officer that I respected very much. We were in the cruise somewhere, and he started to talk to me about chemtrails, and I completely dismissed him out of hand. Utter nonsense, they would never do that, was my thought, and I never gave it another thought. And it wasn't actually until about 3 years ago, and I was actually just locally to me in a cafe which is out in the hills, and I saw a line north-south and then 13 short lines going across it. Now the line north-south was around about 10 miles long because I knew the area and I knew the points on the ground. But the shorter ones across it, there were 13 of them, and they were only about 2 or 3 miles in length. The curious thing is that they stayed there for 40 minutes. So, unfortunately I didn't have my phone with me. I went home in disbelief, I have to say. I phoned a friend of mine who works at the local airport, and he was in the office, and he had a ADSB, which is a tracking software, and he was actually waiting for a business jet to come in and land, and it was 20 minutes later, and he was actually looking at the screen as I asked him. I said, is there an aeroplane over the airport at the moment doing squiggly lines at around about 12,000, 13,000 feet? And he said, no, but there is one at 10. I went, really? Can you give me a registration? And he did. So that led me on a path. Now, I then recalled this conversation, or very short conversation I had with my colleague on that day, and I thought, this is a chemtrail. Now, the reason why I knew it was around about 10 or 12,000 feet was because as I looked up, there were 2 aeroplanes at high altitude, and they were definitely contrailing. So there's a very important difference between a contrail and a chemtrail. And the contrail, I judged, those 2 aeroplanes would have been around about 35 to 37,000 feet. And just using what I call a Mark 1 eyeball and my fingers, I deduced that the long lines I was looking at, was about 2/3 of the way down, or about 1/3 of the way up from the ground. Which means if the aeroplanes are flying at around about 35,000 feet, the lines I was looking at had to be around about 12 or 13,000 feet. So there's some very important issues and differences that people need to understand, and this is absolutely key, how contrails form and what chemtrails are, because the authorities, I have noticed, particularly the members of Parliament, have a standard cut and paste response to any concerned citizen who's writing to them saying, I'm seeing chemtrails, what's going on? Now, the response they get is what I call normalisation of deviance. It's where there is a partial truth and there is probably about a third of it will be true, or a quarter of it will be true. The remainder is very plausible, but because of a lack of knowledge, people don't know. And what you get back from the government is the physiology on how a contrail forms. And they'd be absolutely right, but they've misapplied it, because what you are actually seeing is a chemical trail. So one of the important differences that everybody needs to know is that as we go higher, about every 1,000 feet, the temperature drops about 2 degrees. And it goes down to about minus 63 degrees Celsius, sometimes 65, and those temperatures are found around about 38,000 feet. Contrails can only physically start at 28,000 feet, which is around about minus 40 Celsius. Now, a contrail is water vapor. In fact, it's trillions and trillions of ice crystals, and we've all followed on a damp autumn morning going to work. There are cars in front of us, and we can see steam coming out of the exhaust. That's because the fuel we're burning, and it's not a fossil fuel, by the way, it's a mineral fuel. It's the second most renewable source on the planet. The Rockefellers called it a mineral fuel back in the 30s, I believe it was, 20s or 30s, to give it the idea of scarcity so they could bump up the price. Oil is actually made around about every 10 years, and they're always finding bigger and bigger fields, so we are not going to run out. And then when you look at how many aeroplanes, just in America alone, fly on a daily basis, there are thousands, and a lot of them are big aeroplanes, so they're drinking a lot of fuel, and how many millions of vehicles, mostly V8 engines, that do 15 to the gallon, are running every day in the States. It's certainly not a fossil fuel, it's a mineral fuel, so we need to debunk that one straight away. But nevertheless, over all the grades from diesel, which is basically and the paraffin and petrol, the byproduct of burning that fuel is water, H2O. So what happens, the next question people ask is, well, how come I can see lots of contrails one day and the next day I don't? Does that mean the aeroplanes are not there? The answer to that is no. There are a lot of airlines that have scheduled routes, and they fly regularly on those routes. It's to do with the humidity of the air that they're flying in. The physiology is that as the temperature decreases, the parcel of air is less able to hold water vapor, water moisture. So we know there is something called a temperature and a dew point, and we've all seen in airports, or we've come up in the morning, on a winter's morning, and it's foggy. And that fog is because there's no wind. The air has reduced to its saturation point. It cannot hold the water moisture in it anymore, so it condenses out, and that's what we see as fog or mist. So going up to 30-odd thousand feet, if we go in a dry part, if I'm flying in a dry parcel of air, I can look in my rearview camera and I see absolutely nothing coming out of the back of my engines. But then I can fly along and I get a little bump, like a little bit of turbulence, just for a split second, and I look down at my temperature gauge and it was minus 63, it's now minus 64. So I've now just gone into a different parcel of air which has a different density. I now look back into my camera and I see that I am contrailing. And there are trillions and trillions of ice crystals, so this is the way a jet engine works. The air outside is minus 63 degrees Celsius. The air in the time it takes me to click my fingers has been compressed 5 or 6 times. It has then been burnt. That compressed air is very hot. When you put fuel in there and ignite it, it actually causes a huge amount of pressure which hits the turbine, which goes out the back of the engine. In turn, that turns the big fan at the front, which is giving you most of the thrust. But the burn in the hot section of the engine, which is the most expensive part of the engine, actually burns at around about 700 degrees, or thereabouts 750 degrees Celsius, depending on your engine type. It then cools very, very quickly as it comes out the back of the engine, because the surrounding air is actually minus 63. So if the air is saturated, or pretty much saturated already, and the moisture can't evaporate, it just turns into ice crystals. But the ice crystals do evaporate, and they can evaporate within 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20 seconds, sometimes a bit longer, but they do evaporate. That is perfectly normal. The chemtrails, they applied around anywhere between 10,000 feet and 12,000 feet, and there's a very good reason for that. There's several good reasons for that, in fact. And just visually, when you look up and you see aeroplanes that are contrailing, you also should be able to find them on either Flight Radar 24, which is a really good app on your phone, or ADSB, which is another good app, and ADSB tends to show you more of the military flights. So you will be able to spot the aircraft at 37,000 feet, say over London, and you'll go, oh yes, that looks a big aeroplane. Oh yes, look, it's an Emirates A380. He's at 35,000 feet and he's on his way from Los Angeles to Bahrain or wherever he's going. Now, the one conundrum that we have is that the companies that are applying the chemtrails, they have exactly the same pieces of equipment because the equipment is mandatory, and this is something called a transponder. And this is a 4-digit code, and this is what Flight Radar picks up so they can get a positive identification on what aeroplane you're looking at. Now, the aeroplanes that are chemtrailing do have the transponders, but the software has been altered such that it will not look at various transponder codes. So a transponder, I just want to explain what that's about. It's a mandatory piece of equipment. You cannot get airborne without one. It's the law. So if you can imagine for a moment that you're an air traffic controller and you're looking at your radar screen and you know that there is an aeroplane about to get airborne, your radar head picks the aeroplane up and it's a dot on your screen. But you need more information. You've got no idea. You can see what direction he's going in, but you've got no idea of his altitude or who he is. So what the transponder does is the pilot would have been assigned, before he would have got airborne, a 4-digit code. And on his flight plan, that 4-digit code means that it's assigned to, let's say, a British Airways 777-300, registration, blah, blah, blah. So now the air traffic controller, the one on the radar, when he sees this, he now knows that that is a British Airways 777. But also it takes other pieces of information, such as the captain's altimeter, what that is reading. So he now has, the radar controller now has a very useful set of information. One, there's a dot on his screen. Two, he's identified it as a British Airways 777-300. He now knows the registration. He can see the flight plan. He knows where he's supposed to be going. But also, crucially, the captain's altimeter is actually feeding the controller on the ground exactly what altitude that he's flying through. So the controllers keep an eye on this because if his clearance is to 10,000 feet and he sees he's still climbing, he'll correct him. So all the controllers can see all of this information. And what is perplexing people is that when they switch on their Flight Radar 24 or their ADSB app on their phone or their smart device or whatever, they can't see these airplanes, but they're looking out the windows and they can see that they're there. And that's purely because there's been a software fix so that whenever there's these bank of transponder codes that are assigned, we cannot see them. Just to give you a parallel with that, the last WEF meeting earlier this year in Davos also had over 2,000 business jet movements into the adjacent airport, and yet there was only about 10 or 12 of them were actually recorded. You could actually only see about 10 or 12, so it all looked like they were walking there or getting a horse or something, I don't know. But anyway, so that's why we physically are having trouble tracing these aeroplanes. Now, that first registration that I obtained from my friend was very useful information because that took me to a company called 2Excel Aviation. It's a British company. It's started originally by 2 ex-RAF pilots. They were Top Guns, if you like. They were Red Arrows and previously Harriers, and you had to be creme de la creme to fly the Harrier. And the CEO is a guy called Andy Offer. Now, he did have a business partner who ducked out, and it would appear that he's been attacked and he's had his reputation completely destroyed with some fallacious claims, which we won't go into here. But nevertheless, what they are doing is very contrived, it's very willful, and people say, well, I can't believe the pilots know they're doing it. Well, let me assure you, they do. I'd like to explain a lot of people don't know what it means to get an aeroplane airborne, which is perfectly understandable because you go on holiday, you pay your money, you get on your flight, hopefully it's a nice flight, the crew are nice, you have a couple of drinks, you're feeling in the holiday mood, and you arrive there and the sun is shining, so all is good, and that's the way it's supposed to be. and there's no reason why you should need to know the 101 things that go on behind the scenes to get an aeroplane airborne. But I would like to just allude to that because it's very important, because it demonstrates that what is going on is very, very, very willful. It's all very well contrived. Now, chemtrails, sadly, is nothing new. We're just starting to notice them. That's the shock for us. They've been doing it for years. It's been pioneered in the States. It's something that Rockefellers were involved with and sponsoring. A lot of it's been done out of the back of military aircraft, particularly military transport aircraft, such as the C-17, which is a very, very heavy jet, very big and very capable jet. We have them, the RAF have them. The Hercules has just been retired, but that again is another perfect platform for chemtrails. For delivering anything actually, because you can throw whatever you like out of the back of one of those. And the replacement for the Hercules is the AM400, which looks very similar, but a much more modern version, and that's made by Airbus. So the wonderful thing about these aeroplanes is that they are utility aeroplanes. So in other words, you can carry a tank one minute, you can carry VIP cars the next, you can carry cargo, and the floor is like a cargo deck. It has lockdown positions, so if you have any equipment on what we call a pallet, you can get a forklift truck which just puts the pallet into the aeroplane, it clips down to the floor in seconds, and there you've now got yourself an instant chemtrail kit or whatever. So that's how it works. 2XL Aviation Broadsword, which is their full name, that actually has satanic links, by the way, if you want to check it out. They have two Boeing 727s. Now these are very old aeroplanes. In fact, they were the last ones off the production lines, but they're still about 40 years old. They originally were 3 cockpit crew. That was a flight engineer, first officer and a captain. FedEx, these are ex-FedEx aeroplanes flying around the States for 40 years. They've got rid of them, full flight management systems. They don't need a flight engineer. And these particular aeroplanes were brought over from the States. They were already cargo aeroplanes, so they lend themselves very nicely to conversion. Now, these aeroplanes have 7 lateral tanks across the aircraft from front to back. They also have a range of valves, pumps and control mechanisms, and there is a fixed boom at the back of the aircraft which goes underneath the 2 engines. Now the 727, for those of you who don't know, is a 3-engine aeroplane, and the engines are all at the rear of the aircraft. And this boom actually goes laterally across the back of the aircraft, where it won't hit the ground when you rotate for takeoff and you flare for landing. They can be readily removed. That's just a light job in the hangar. But 2XL Aviation is very well organised. They were at Doncaster. That was their main base for the 727s, and they have a fleet of other smaller aircraft which get involved with Coast Guard work, monitoring, surveillance. What are they looking at? We don't know. They've obviously got some very high-tech cameras, sensors and all sorts. They're not the only company doing this, by the way. There is another one called RVL, who are East Midlands. But I'll mention those in a moment. That's a younger company. So 2XL, if you go on their website, anybody can go on their website. They also have a hangar down in a place called Lasham, which not many people have heard of. It's just west of London. It's the premier site for gliding in the UK. But there's also a hangar there which used to belong to an old company called Dan Air. And that was specifically built for the 727 because Dan Air operated 727s as passenger jets many years ago. 2XL now own it. It can maintain 757s, it can maintain 737s, and 727, and that's their heavy maintenance. It's ideal because although you might get a lot of spotters down at Lasham, they can't get anywhere near the hangar, and so it's pretty well protected. And if you think about it, Doncaster, although Peel Holdings, who owned it, and they've now closed it because it was hemorrhaging money, that's the reason it's closed, was an excellent airfield, but again, it's not a popular one because they're mainly just cargo aeroplanes going in and out, and it's not a haven for spotters. So they don't base themselves at any of the major international airports. It also means that when they want to get airborne, there's generally no delays, but if they were at, say, like Manchester or Glasgow or Heathrow, you can have hours and hours and hours of delays just trying to get airborne, trying to get slots and all sorts of things. So these airports are absolutely ideal. Another one where there's been some action from is Newquay, Bournemouth, Prestwick. Prestwick's a big one. Prestwick's actually the jewel in Scotland's crown because that has a microclimate, whereas Glasgow and Edinburgh can be fogged out. Prestwick is, you can get into Prestwick. There's a lot of military equipment going to Ukraine has been taken out of Prestwick.
That we know for a fact because the Ukrainian aircraft have been in and out of there regularly, cargo aircraft have been in and out regularly, but that's a side issue. So these are ideal places with which to operate almost by stealth because you don't get the spotters there. They're now at Teesside. MME is the code for Teesside, and that's where they're operating the 727s. They've also operated out of Stansted, by the way. Now, their official guise, and if you read their website, they are for oil spill response. This means that they spray detergents on oil. And at the moment, Go SRB, so G is the British registration, OSRB, which is their second 727, Go SRA is the first registration. That's down in Djibouti at the moment because they are actually transferring crude oil from one tanker that's had problems, and they are transferring it to another tanker, and obviously if there is a spill, they've got that aircraft there on standby to spray detergents. So winding it back a few years, when I first noticed this rather unusual pattern in the sky, which was a chemtrail, I looked at the company and I thought, oil spill response, well, yeah, that's a good thing. Why do they need 2 aeroplanes? How many oil spills have we had around the UK in the last, 20 years? Why do they need 2? And that's going to be an enormous cost to just, it's not just a matter of keeping the aeroplanes running, you've got to keep them maintained, you've got to fly them, make sure it all works. That costs money, and if you're not actually bringing any money in, who's paying for all of that? That's very expensive. These aeroplanes are not the most economic, and they haven't got a huge range. So they boast that they could get down to Australia. If Australia had a big problem, or South America, yeah, they could. But it's going to take a couple of days because they're going to have to keep stopping for fuel, and then the crew will go out of hours. So that got me immediately suspicious. So it's lateral thinking, and this is what I would encourage everybody to do. And I think a lot of people are waking up to this, which is really good. So if you wanted to start, let me just tell you a little bit now about the construction of how you would start to lawfully commence an airline. So if you and I wanted to start an airline, we would have to produce a lot of manuals. We'd have to see we'd have to prove where we get the finance from to buy or lease the aircraft. And we submit all of this to the Civil Aviation Authority. Now, if it's just a passenger airline going from the UK to, I don't know, the Canary Islands or wherever, then to be honest, our manuals will be 90% the same as British Airways, TUI, Jet2, EasyJet. It's almost cut and paste. And in those manuals it says how you're going to operate the aeroplane, how you're going to train the crew, standards and everything else, accountability and everything. The whole ethos and construction of how you run the airline with all the safety measures are contained within those manuals. The CAA look at them and they know the scope of your business, and then they grant you something called an AOC, which is an Air Operator's Certificate, and you get inspected. As a result of that, you get inspected by an operations inspector that will check your crewing department are doing the job they're supposed to be doing, that your operations department, who provide the flight plans for the aircraft and other such things as maintenance and so on, and that they're scheduling all of that properly. And if they're not, then they either get issued a violation or they get some sort of notification whereby they have to rectify what they haven't done. And depending on the severity of that, they can actually, the worst ones will be, they can actually revoke your AOC immediately. And that's for highly illegal activities, obviously. And I don't know anybody that's actually had that, but they have, the CAA have the power to do that. So looking at Civil Aviation's AOC, it says that they can fly low level over the sea, spraying detergents on oil spills. And I thought, brilliant. They're in gross violation of their AOC because they're spraying over land. Last time I looked, we didn't actually have an oil tanker spill over Manchester. So anyway, they have 2 AOCs. There is another one which allows them to fly over forested areas.
Right.
So I thought, now, last time I looked, there wasn't really a forest over London, Birmingham, Glasgow, Manchester. So that is in gross violation. Now, again, I know of people that have written to the Civil Aviation Authority and they've had pretty much the same response as the MPs are giving. You're delusional, you're confused. So in this day and age of people becoming a lot more conscious about things and a lot more aware, that now to me exposes the CAA completely. although it's very uncomfortable for everybody, and just going on a sweeping generalisation here, people will realise that we are being hoodwinked, we are being blindsided, we are being lied to. And it is going on for a painfully long time, but the good news is, if we look on the upside, and there is an upside to this, it's exposing all the people who we probably didn't previously know were involved with the narrative.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there. So the CIA are definitely involved. Now, they have to have the approval for these two aeroplanes would have been very unusual for the CIA. I say that because it's not a normal airline. They can't take passengers on the 727. They've, 2XL Aviation, designed, built and installed all of the tanks that spray the chemicals. Also in their manuals, it will have to have all the protective equipment and how they handle the chemicals and what they're allowed to take. Now this brings you into the area of something called dangerous goods. A lot of airlines have got dangerous goods approvals because it helps bolster their revenue. So in the cargo deck you can have all of the passengers' bags, and then further in the cargo deck you can actually have, underneath the aircraft, you can have all the holds, as we call them. You can have aluminium, what we call bins, and they can have dangerous goods inside. Now there'll be restrictions on the dangerous goods. It's very, very strictly controlled, but obviously by carrying it from A to B, it's extra revenue. So they have a dangerous goods license.
Okay.
They also have to maintain all the equipment, and so when they get inspected, they will have an operations inspection, and they will also have an engineering inspection.
Right.
And the engineering inspection will check that they're doing everything they should do. They'll have a look at maintenance records, they'll have a look at serviceability of the aircraft. So it's all encapsulating, because the CIA have a responsibility to do this. Now, when the application to convert these aeroplanes would have come across the desk of anybody in the CIA, they would have gone, oh, hang on a minute, this is not the normal cut and paste. It's not a normal airline. Hold on a minute. Right, so the clue there is that they should actually sit up and pay attention and go through everything with fine detail. So in other words, they know exactly what they're doing. So the CIA can also allow, they shelve some of their responsibility because they allow something called a Section 20, and I'm going to explain that. So 2XL designed and built their system. They installed their system, they maintain their system on their aeroplanes. If they need to modify anything, the old way of doing it would, they would have to draw up the drawings, they'd have to make the parts, they'd have to supply it all to the CIA for their approval. The CIA, if they've given them a Part 20, the Section 20 means that 2XL actually don't have to do that. They can just go ahead and do it themselves. Obviously, if they're inspected, then they have to satisfy all the regulatory requirements. So, but to be given carte blanche to pretty much alter your aeroplanes to do more or less what you like is an open invitation for anybody that's got any nefarious schemes at the back of their mind. Loophole, yes, it is a loophole, that's exactly right. So, yeah.
Wow, that's
it, sort of in a basic nutshell. To expand on that, what I'd like, the other question that I've been asked frequently is, well, do the pilots know, and how is this allowed? How is it physically happening? So, when you get an aeroplane airborne, the crew have to be licensed to fly that aircraft, which means they've gone through the training, they've gone through simulators, they've gone through with training captains, and they've reached a minimum standard, and they get signed off, then they send their license to the CIA, and they say you're now licensed to fly that aircraft. So you've got to have a licensed crew. You can't jump from a 737 to a 777 or something like that. You have to be type specific. Now the other thing is that all of these pilots, virtually all of them, are ex-RAF. Now this is key, because the RAF guys are used to doing, shall we say, clandestine operations, unusual operations, some of which you might need a bit of a moral compass, but you do get a little bit blind to it, or you get used to it. It becomes normalisation. And they've also, crucially, signed the Official Secrets Act, which means they don't talk. Interestingly enough, almost exclusively the engineers that maintain those two 727s are also ex-RAF. So no one else is really allowed near them. So that obviously keeps a lot of things in-house. Here's my thing, and I put this out to everybody. Somebody must live next to an engineer. Somebody must live next to an air traffic controller. Somebody must live next to a baggage handler at the airport. So I'm encouraging everybody to ask questions. If you know these people, and a lot of people are in denial about this, but once you start pointing in the right directions, if they start looking, they'll find it, and they'll go, okay, for the rest of my life I've actually made a mistake. Yes, you're right, I need to look into this. We do need more information. We do have a huge amount of intelligence on this. And the other company which I'm going to mention is RVL. And they also, if you look at their website, it looks like a fairly young company. They've actually taken on light aircraft. They do a lot of surveillance, again, Coast Guard type of work, monitoring, whatever that means, and air sampling. And these aircraft that do the air sampling, there's some that are Danish registered. These are called P-38s, I think they are. Sorry, probably P-68s, they're Parts Navies, they're piston engine twins. Light aircraft with obviously a lot of sensing equipment on. These are not doing the spraying, but these are the ones that you can occasionally see on flight radar that are doing these either racetrack patterns or these patterns where they go up and down, up and down, up and down, and they eventually cover a large area. What they're looking at, what they're surveying, I have no idea. That's just a slightly different dynamic. But those flights have been on the increase over the last, particularly over the last year and a half. They've again fired on Newquay, Southampton, Stansted, Teesside, and Scotland, I think it's Prestwick, and Liverpool, also Liverpool.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you think the reasons are for all of this operations? It's obviously, it's not just here, is it? It's in America, obviously, as well. And
yeah.
I presume I don't get to travel as much as I have in the past, but I presume it's all over the place.
It is. I think it's pioneered in America. We've been messing about with it over here in different guises, not so much airborne, but we've been messing around with it for a long time. With the Freedom of Information Act, and also you can go to the Records Office up in Glasgow, you can actually see now a lot of the experiments that the British government were doing a long time ago, just on the ground. So typically they'd be spraying chemicals onto a passing train that would be going into a tunnel, which obviously the wind vortices just whip everything up and makes everything spread. They were doing that down in Dorset, they've been doing it in Norfolk. The government strenuously denied it at the time, but obviously with these releases of information after 30 years, you can see all of this. So sadly, it's nothing new. America has been blighted with it for a lot longer, and the reason everything is inextricably linked, and which I will try and demonstrate. But the two purposes for chemtrailing are very, very clear. If you look at the contents of the chemtrails, which we've managed to obtain samples, they have been reverse engineered, if you like, with a mass spectrometer, and this has mainly been done in the States. But the three main ingredients tend to be barium, strontium, and aluminium oxide, all of which are carcinogenic, and the aluminium causes autism and what was it? Sorry, it's gone mad. Oh dear.
But these are all heavy metals.
Alzheimer's, sorry. that was not meant to be a pun, by the way. Alzheimer's is on the massive increase.
It really is.
Yeah.
And heavy metals plays a big part in that, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah. So by spraying it, you see, these are also, we've got to bear in mind that these are not just microparticles, they're nanoparticles, they've got nanoparticles. They can put pretty much anything they like into this. Can they put graphene oxide in it? Yeah, of course they can. They can put anything they want in it. And of course it absolutely poisons everything. So it's the watercourses, it's the grass, it's the trees, it's the animals, it's us. I've noticed this even on my own vehicles. You know, I've left one car in the drive for a couple of days, I've washed it, and it's very gritty, which it never used to be, and they've been chemtrailing. Sadly, a lot of neighbours of mine, they can see me looking up and they go, oh, I'm just going to wash the car, you know, that's rubbish, John, they'd never do that. And they're doing it over our heads.